Level 1. It never starts with chaos. It begins quietly, in a clinic, a laboratory, or a cage no one ever thought to lock twice. A researcher stares into a microscope and sees movement where none should be, a mutation, a recombination of RNA so subtle that even seasoned virologists would call it noise. The strain was meant for study, a neuroinflammatory virus used in animal behavior trials. But in the right host, a human, its code behaves differently. It invades neurons instead of destroying them, rewiring aggression, suppressing empathy, and hijacking the limbic system. The first infection is dismissed as a lab accident. The patient runs a fever, trembles, mutters incoherently. Hours later, the delirium becomes violence. The pupils dilate. Pain response disappears. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream, while higher reasoning shuts down. When restraint fails, the first bite is recorded, not as a historic event, but as an emergency incident report that will never reach the public. By the time the body bag is sealed, the pathogen has already escaped, carried on gloves, on air filters, on the breath of one terrified intern. The world keeps spinning, unaware that the line between life and death has just been rewritten at the molecular level. The age of infection has begun. Level 2. Hospitals in the surrounding district begin admitting patients with strange neurological symptoms, seizures, delirium, and sudden psychosis. Paramedics whisper about victims biting through restraints. Public health officials call it a severe viral encephalitis. They reassure the press it isn't airborne, that it's under control. But containment fails before it begins. One infected commuter collapses on a subway platform, and in the struggle to help him, 7 more are bitten. The network of transmission widens invisibly through sweat, saliva, and blood. The news cycle turns frantic. Unexplained violence in downtown district. Possible drug-induced outbreak. In every story, the same refrain. The victims do not respond to pain, and they do not stop moving. Inside the hospitals, doctors work until exhaustion. They attempt antivirals, sedatives, even induced comas. None of it matters. Autopsies reveal that the virus floods the brainstem, leaving primitive motor functions intact while shutting down judgment and empathy. It is not resurrection, it's regression, a forced return to the earliest neural blueprint of survival. Feed, move, bite. When the first emergency quarantine zone is breached, a crowd pushing past barricades to find loved ones, the outbreak reaches critical mass. Police fire rubber bullets that do nothing. The infected don't retreat. One officer switches to live rounds. That footage, shaky and horrifying, loops on global news. By nightfall, the term zombie trends for the first time in history. Level 3. 3 days later, the world's first city falls. At first, authorities deploy riot control, curfews, checkpoints, disinfectant fogs, but the pathogen moves faster than bureaucracy. Power stations are left unmanned as workers flee. The internet slows to a crawl under the weight of unanswered pleas for help. What was once a metropolis becomes a labyrinth of sirens and fire. Skyscrapers burn like candles, hospitals overflow, morgues fail to contain the dead, and every ambulance becomes another vector. Those bitten but not yet symptomatic hide their wounds, hoping for a cure that will never arrive. Inside the chaos, another threat emerges: panic. Humans turn on each other long before the infected reach them. Food riots, looting, the collapse of social trust. The thin membrane of civilization begins to tear. Emergency broadcasts urge calm, but even the broadcasters sound uncertain. Stay indoors, they say. Await military instruction. The military itself is already fracturing. Close quarters combat spreads the virus through blood spray and open wounds. Soldiers who survive the night rarely last the week. By the 7th day, the city's skyline flickers out. From orbit, satellites record a dark stain spreading across the continent, a biological wildfire feeding on population density. The era of containment is over. The era of survival begins. Level 4. Humanity built a world too connected to quarantine. One asymptomatic pilot boards a flight before fever sets in. A refugee ship docks in a port that hasn't yet heard the news. Aid workers arrive carrying hope, and unknowingly, the pathogen. Within weeks, infection crosses oceans, borders, and hemispheres. The World Health Organization declares an international health emergency, but the statement arrives 2 days too late. Airports become war zones of panic. Governments enforce travel bans that trigger more chaos than control. Mutations begin to appear. The original strain, bloodborne, adapts to transmit through microscopic droplets, surviving in moisture and temperature ranges previously impossible. Scientists realize the virus is self-optimizing, editing its own replication code within hosts. Civilization reacts with denial first, then despair. Some nations attempt sterilization campaigns, burning entire districts. Others vanish into radio silence. Religious movements call it divine reckoning. Conspiracy networks call it biowarfare. The truth no longer matters. Only the rate of infection does, and that curve now climbs vertically. In isolated labs, virologists study samples under armed guard. They name it HN-V-37, human neurotropic virus 37. Its mechanism is elegant and horrifying. A prion-like agent that rewires synapses, bypassing higher cortical control while keeping the hypothalamus active. The result is not death, but perpetual predation. Humanity's first planetary pandemic is no longer measured in cases, but in continents. Level 5. Months pass, governments collapse, satellites drift in orbit without instruction, the infected no longer decompose as expected. Researchers notice something impossible. Their tissue regenerates just enough to prevent decay. The virus has learned to recycle lactic acid, maintaining mobility long after death would normally claim the host. Their eyes cloud, their skin grays, but beneath that surface is a biological system still fighting to survive. In field labs, what remains of the scientific community makes a grim discovery. The virus is evolving within every host, not just mutating randomly, but coordinating. Its genetic sequences suggest cross-communication, as if each infected body is part of a greater neural web. That realization changes everything. Humanity is not facing corpses, it's facing a collective organism. Every bite, every infection expands the network, adding new data, new reflexes, new adaptations. Thermal scans show that infected groups now hunt cooperatively. They circle prey, they use sound strategically. Some mimic human cries to lure survivors. What began as chaos has become instinctive design. Attempts at counter-biological weapons fail. Chemical burns and fire destroy tissue but aerosolize viral particles. The world's remaining safe zones shrink to mountain bunkers and offshore rigs. Power grids flicker and die. Satellites still transmit ghost signals. Images of cities drowned in fog and heat signatures moving like rivers through the streets. Human civilization, once defined by intelligence, now faces a rival intelligence built from hunger. Level 6. There comes a moment when the chain of command breaks, not in silence, but in the crack of static-filled radios and unanswered distress calls. The world's superpowers once believed no crisis could surpass their protocols. They had plans for nuclear war, bioterrorism, even asteroid impacts, but not this. Not a virus that erases the line between human and host. Cities that were once capitals are now quarantined craters. Governments retreat underground to fortified bunkers carved beneath mountains, their leaders protected by soldiers who barely sleep. Communication between nations fades, replaced by ghost transmissions. Last pleas, encrypted warnings, automated beacons looping endlessly into the void. Nuclear submarines drift without orders. Aircraft carriers float unmanned, their decks crawling with the remnants of their own crew. Satellites, once symbols of human mastery, record only the glow of burning continents. By now, the population has fallen below 1 billion. Power grids are gone. The night belongs to darkness. It isn't war anymore. It's surrender. Human civilization, built over millennia, ends not with a bang, but with the sound of wind whistling through abandoned cities. In epidemiological models, even a 10% infection rate can paralyze modern logistics. Food, fuel, and medicine vanish in weeks. Level 7. The infection has stabilized, not because it's slowing down, but because there's almost nothing left to infect. Humanity now exists as small clusters of survivors, scattered across remote outposts, Arctic shelters, island bases, and isolated mountain stations. But even these refugees are temporary. The infected no longer die quickly. Some adapt to cold climates, slowing their metabolism to near hibernation. When the snow melts, they move again. Ecosystems crumble. With humans gone, factory farms and power plants fail, releasing toxic plumes. Domesticated animals starve or turn feral. Large predators vanish. And in this vacuum, the infected rise as apex organisms, perfect, tireless scavengers that require nothing but movement and time. Scientists once called it extinction-level collapse. But extinction doesn't mean immediate death. It's the long silence after the noise. Earth begins to change. Vegetation overruns cities, rivers reclaim highways. The world doesn't die, it resets. The infection becomes part of the biosphere, a biological inevitability written into evolution's next chapter. If humanity vanished today, most cities would be reclaimed by nature within 200 years. Concrete cracks, forests return, and wildlife rebalances itself. The infection described mirrors the behavior of neurotropic viruses, like rabies or toxoplasma, which alter host behavior to improve their own spread, a known phenomenon in nature. Level 8. Centuries have passed. Humanity, as we knew it, is gone, but the virus remains. At first, the infected were unstable, decaying, mindless, driven purely by hunger. But evolution never stops. Generation by generation, the pathogen refined its design. Its hosts learned to conserve energy, to cooperate, to communicate in primitive signals, clicks, grunts, rhythmic gestures. What began as a plague becomes a species. They are not human, but they remember humanity in fragments. The virus has encoded parts of neural memory into its replication cycle, allowing collective instincts to persist. Tribes form. They avoid daylight, nesting in ruins overgrown with moss. They scavenge tools, bones, and scraps of civilization without fully knowing why. Somewhere deep in their genetic memory, survival carries the echo of purpose. Biologists, the few still alive in hidden enclaves, name them Homo necrosapiens, the dead wise, a new offshoot of humanity, sculpted by nature's harshest selection pressure. In them lies both horror and symmetry. The virus gave back what it once stole. Not life as we define it, but continuity. The reign of humanity ends, but life continues. Level 9. The world no longer belongs to humans. Forests grow over skyscrapers. Coral reefs reclaim coastal cities. The air clears. The ozone heals. Infected tribes roam the ruins, hunting by moonlight, territorial and organized. They are part of the natural order now. Predators evolved from human origins. Occasionally, they uncover relics of the past, a cracked smartphone, a rusted helmet, a faded photograph. They do not understand these artifacts, but they keep them. Some even mimic the behaviors of their ancestors, gathering in circles, making noises that once were words. To an outside observer, it might seem civilization has returned, but through a darker mirror. Firelight flickers in the husks of buildings once filled with electricity. The cycle continues. Life, death, adaptation. From space, Earth looks alive again. Not human, but alive. The infection has achieved what humanity could not: balance with its environment. This stage parallels post-human ecology, a real scientific thought experiment used in climate and extinction modeling. If humanity disappeared, the planet would self-repair within a few thousand years. Viruses and microbes would dominate evolutionary niches once held by mammals, accelerating genetic drift and new species emergence. Level 10. A million years later, something extraordinary happens. Among the evolved descendants of the infected, small changes appear. Improved tool use, complex communication patterns, the first signs of abstract thought. They no longer resemble humans in form, but traces of human cognition, problem-solving, curiosity, emotion, begin to re-emerge. The virus, once a destroyer of intellect, has become the architect of a new mind. Its genetic code, merged with ancient human DNA, now forms a stable hybrid species capable of memory, cooperation, and planning. In their primitive language, there are words for son, fear, and ancestor. They dig in the earth and find ruins, bones, weapons, fragments of glass, and build myths around them. To them, humans are gods who burned the sky. Civilization is reborn, not as a continuation of ours, but as its consequence. The infection that ended the world becomes the seed for its next evolution. And so, in the quiet echo of eternity, life begins again. This mirrors real principles of convergent evolution, where unrelated species evolve similar traits when facing comparable survival pressures. Every outbreak, every extinction, every collapse in history follows one unbreakable pattern. Entropy gives way to rebirth. From one infected cell to a new intelligent species, the universe remains indifferent but creative. And when the next observer looks to the ruins of our world, they will not ask what ended us, only what began after.